Have you ever wondered why you keep attracting the same toxic people into your life? Why you sabotage yourself just when success is within reach? Why you feel triggered by certain people for reasons you can't quite explain? What if I told you that your biggest enemy isn't your difficult boss, your manipulative ex, or even society itself? What if your greatest obstacle is literally staring back at you in the mirror every morning? Today, we're diving deep into one of Carl Jung's most powerful and disturbing discoveries. A psychological truth so uncomfortable that most people spend their entire lives running from it. But those brave enough to face it unlock a level of self-awareness that changes everything. Because here's what Jung discovered: the very traits you despise most in others, the behaviors that trigger your strongest reactions, the qualities that make you say, "I would never be like that," these are often the exact aspects of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. Jung called this your shadow, and understanding it isn't just academic psychology, it's the key to stopping the cycle of self-destruction that's been controlling your life without you even realizing it. Think about the last person who really got under your skin. Maybe it was someone who seemed selfish, attention-seeking, or manipulative. Maybe it was someone who appeared weak, overly emotional, or desperate for approval. Now here's the uncomfortable question. What if your intense reaction to them was actually your psyche trying to show you something about yourself? The shadow isn't just your dark side. It's everything about yourself that you've decided is unacceptable. It's every impulse you've suppressed, every desire you've deemed inappropriate, every aspect of your personality you've buried because you feared it would make you unlovable. But here's where it gets really interesting. These rejected parts of yourself don't just disappear. They don't politely exit your psyche when you decide you don't want them. Instead, they go underground. They become your shadow. And from there, they run your life in ways you can't imagine. You see, when you refuse to acknowledge these aspects of yourself, you start projecting them onto others. You become hypersensitive to these qualities in other people. You attract situations that force you to confront what you're trying to avoid. You create the very problems you're trying to escape. The perfectionist who can't stand lazy people is often someone who desperately wants to relax but feels guilty about it. The person who judges others for being too emotional is usually someone who's terrified of their own feelings. The one who criticizes others for being attention-seeking probably craves recognition but feels ashamed of that desire. This is why Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. Your triggers aren't random, they're your shadow trying to get your attention. But the shadow doesn't just create external conflicts, it's also the hidden force behind your self-sabotage patterns. Every time you're on the verge of success and suddenly find yourself procrastinating, every time you're close to love and push the person away, every time you have an opportunity and convince yourself you're not ready, that's your shadow at work. Why does this happen? Because deep down, your shadow contains beliefs about what you deserve, what you're capable of, and who you're allowed to be. If success threatens your hidden self-image, you'll sabotage it. If love challenges your secret belief that you're unworthy, you'll push it away. If growth requires you to embrace qualities you've rejected, you'll stay stuck. Think about it. How many times have you been your own worst enemy? How many opportunities have you talked yourself out of? How many relationships have you destroyed just when they were getting real? How many times have you said, "I always do this," or "this always happens to me"? That's not bad luck. That's not the universe being cruel. That's your shadow protecting you from becoming something that conflicts with your unconscious self-image. Jung understood that we don't just have one personality. We have multiple aspects, multiple potential selves. The person you present to the world is just one part of who you are. The shadow contains all the other parts, the ones you've decided are too dangerous, too shameful, or too threatening to integrate. But here's the twist. Many of these dark qualities aren't actually dark at all. They're often your greatest strengths in disguise. Your anger might be your passion. Your selfishness might be your self-preservation. Your pride might be your dignity. Your darkness might be your depth. The problem isn't that you have these qualities. The problem is that you've been taught to see them as enemies instead of allies. You've been conditioned to believe that certain aspects of humanity are unacceptable, so you've split yourself in half. You've created an internal war between who you think you should be and who you actually are. And this war is exhausting. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The more energy you spend keeping these aspects of yourself submerged, the more powerfully they influence your life from the shadows. Now, let's talk about how this shows up in your daily life. Have you ever noticed how you can instantly spot certain types of people? How you can sense manipulation from a mile away, or immediately recognize when someone is being fake? That's not just intuition. That's your shadow recognizing its own qualities reflected in someone else. The most judgmental people often have the harshest inner critics. The most controlling people are usually terrified of being out of control. The most people-pleasing individuals often have the strongest hidden anger. The most positive people frequently have the deepest unexpressed sadness. This is why Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." But most people never get there because they're too busy being who they think they should be. Your shadow also explains why you keep attracting the same situations over and over. If you haven't integrated your manipulative side, you'll keep attracting manipulative people who will mirror it back to you. If you haven't owned your neediness, you'll keep ending up in relationships where you feel needy and desperate. If you haven't accepted your anger, you'll keep finding yourself in situations that make you furious. The external world becomes a reflection of your internal world. You don't just randomly encounter difficult people. You magnetize them because they carry the disowned parts of yourself that you need to reclaim. But here's where the real transformation begins. When you start to recognize these patterns, when you begin to see your shadow at work, you have a choice. You can keep fighting these aspects of yourself, or you can start to integrate them. Integration doesn't mean acting out every impulse or embracing destructive behaviors. It means acknowledging these parts of yourself with compassion instead of judgment. It means finding healthy ways to express what you've been suppressing. It means becoming whole instead of staying divided. For example, if you've rejected your anger, integration might mean learning to set boundaries instead of exploding. If you've disowned your neediness, it might mean asking for help instead of becoming codependent. If you've suppressed your selfishness, it might mean practicing self-care instead of being narcissistic. The goal isn't to become your shadow. The goal is to stop being controlled by it. When you bring these aspects into consciousness, they lose their power to sabotage you from the underground. They become resources instead of obstacles. Jung had a process for this. He called it shadow work, and it starts with a simple but terrifying question. What if the thing I judge most harshly in others is actually something I need to develop in myself? This is where most people stop, because looking at your shadow requires brutal honesty. It requires admitting that you're not who you pretend to be. It requires acknowledging that you have every quality you've ever criticized in someone else. But here's what happens when you have the courage to look. You stop being triggered by other people's behavior because you've made peace with those same qualities in yourself. You stop attracting dysfunctional situations because you're no longer trying to resolve internal conflicts through external drama. You stop sabotaging yourself because you've integrated the parts of yourself that were creating the sabotage. Most importantly, you stop being your own worst enemy. You become your own best friend. You start working with your full personality instead of just the parts you've deemed acceptable. This is what Jung called individuation. It's the process of becoming whole, of integrating all aspects of yourself into a cohesive, authentic self. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming complete. But let's be honest about what this journey looks like. Shadow work isn't comfortable. It's not Instagram-worthy. It's not something you can do in a weekend workshop or a 30-day challenge. It requires you to look at the parts of yourself you've been running from your entire life. It requires you to admit that you're capable of the very behaviors you've condemned in others. It requires you to feel the feelings you've been avoiding, to acknowledge the desires you've been denying, to embrace the aspects of yourself you've been rejecting. And here's the hardest part. As you start to integrate your shadow, other people might not like it. They might prefer you divided, conflicted, and controllable. They might be uncomfortable with your newfound wholeness. They might try to push you back into the box of who they think you should be. But this is exactly why the work is so important. Because as long as you're at war with yourself, you'll always be vulnerable to manipulation. You'll always be easy to control. You'll always be susceptible to people who trigger your shadow and then exploit the chaos that follows. When you integrate your shadow, you become immune to these games. You can't be manipulated by someone pointing out your flaws because you've already acknowledged them. You can't be controlled by someone threatening to reveal your dark side because you've already made friends with it. This is the ultimate freedom. Not the freedom from having difficult aspects of yourself, but the freedom that comes from accepting all of who you are. It's the freedom to be authentically yourself without constantly monitoring, editing, or suppressing parts of your personality. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop trying to be perfect, you become magnetic. When you stop hiding your flaws, you become trustworthy. When you stop fighting your shadow, you become powerful. Not the kind of power that dominates others, but the kind of power that comes from being comfortable in your own skin. People can sense when someone is integrated. They can feel when someone has done the work of becoming whole. There's an authenticity, a presence, a grounded confidence that comes from self-acceptance. It's not arrogance. It's not fake positivity. It's the quiet strength of someone who knows themselves completely and loves themselves anyway. But perhaps most importantly, when you integrate your shadow, you stop creating enemies. You stop seeing the world in terms of good and evil, right and wrong, us and them. You start seeing the full spectrum of human experience in yourself and others. You develop compassion for the very qualities you once condemned. This doesn't mean you become passive or accepting of harmful behavior. It means you can respond to difficult people and situations from a place of wholeness rather than reactivity. You can set boundaries without hatred. You can say no without guilt. You can protect yourself without becoming cruel. You realize that your worst enemy was never out there. It was the war you were fighting within yourself. And the moment you call a ceasefire, everything changes. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is your invitation to make the darkness conscious, to stop running from your shadow and start dancing with it instead. Are you ready to stop being your own worst enemy? Are you ready to integrate the parts of yourself you've been fighting? Are you ready to become whole? Because on the other side of this work is a version of yourself you've never met, a version that's integrated, authentic, and free, a version that creates instead of destroys, that loves instead of fears, that builds instead of sabotages. Your shadow is waiting, not to destroy you, but to complete you. The question is, are you brave enough to look? If this message resonates with you, if you're ready to begin this journey of integration, write in the comments, "I'm ready to meet my shadow." Let's see how many of you are prepared to become your own best friend instead of your worst enemy. And remember, this is just the beginning. The journey of shadow integration is lifelong, but every step makes you more whole, more authentic, more free. Keep watching, keep learning, keep growing. Your integrated self is waiting.